Serious. What's the most horrific thing that happened in your neighborhood/town? Story 1. During the summer of 2008-ish, I think, my hometown caught a serial killer. He was a truck driver and had been murdering people along his route. He pulled into a rest area, hopped the fence to get into the neighborhood, and tried doors on residential houses until he found one unlocked. The daughter was sleeping in the basement of the house because it was cooler, and her brother, who left his keys at home, was supposed to come home later that night, so she left the door unlocked for him. So she wakes up to this massive truck driver holding a knife to her throat and a hand over her mouth telling her he'll kill her if she screams. She didn't scream, but her parents heard what sounded like whimpering and went downstairs to investigate. When the dad saw what was happening, he jumped on the guy's back and managed to startle him enough for the daughter to run away. Then while the daughter was running to call 911, the dad got the guy off him, and the mother ran over and grabbed the knife by the blade to yank it out of his grip, while the dad jumped him again and started punching him in the head. The police showed up shortly after and got the truck driver in custody and found some fricked up crap in his truck. Tons of hunting knives, duct tape, a DVD titled something like Hunting Humans, other crap like that, and connected him to some other murders in other states. He ended up pleading guilty and is spending his life in prison. Her brother ended up never coming home that night because he stayed at a friend's house and forgot to call to tell them he was staying. Talk about some friggin' guilt. The daughter was in the same grade as my boyfriend and actually lived about half a mile away. She came out of the trauma like a frickin' champ and is doing great now. I know exactly where this happened. I live in the area. What a creep. Those parents are so metal. No kidding. The biggest props to those parents. I'm so glad things turned out all right for that family and that the daughter is doing okay. Also, can we give a medal to that mom for grabbing the knife by the blade and another medal to the dad for diving in like that? This guy tried to turn these people into victims, but they had some big main character energy. Hell yeah. Story 2. The 11-year-old girl who lived next door was kidnapped and held for 3 years before being miraculously found 2 states away because of a freak traffic accident. She was taken near the elementary school she went to, and it was a huge shock to everyone nearby. There was a huge support to help find her, but after weeks of no success and no news, it died down. Her mother had died of cancer, so the father grieved alone for 3 years that his only child had been taken. Fast forward 3 years, and the daughter was found. The guy who took her had booked it immediately after, taking her 2 states away. He happened to be getting gas when someone backed into his car in an accident, and the cops were called when someone noticed the young girl tied up in the damaged trunk. He fled, but was captured within 24 hours. She was brought back home and lived next door to us for a few more years. I knew her before, and she was never the same after she was brought back. The physical and emotional trauma of being held captive and abused for 3 years had left her dead inside. He had her in therapy for a long time, but I haven't heard anything about her in years. No clue how she's doing now, but I truly hope everything worked out for her. I never thought I'd be happy about a car accident. Story 3. Sadly, someone murdered, and set fire to the house of a very sweet elderly lady in the very small town I grew up in a few years ago. According to his confession to what was stated with his own sick pride, he had let her burn to death while she screamed tied up in her own bed. He had just gotten out of jail for doing the same to other old ladies, which he had served 25 or so years for. She was really a wonderful woman. She sang in the church choir with my mother and I, and when my mom passed, she was the first to send her condolences and bring us food. Her husband had died many years ago, so she lived by herself out in the country. This was one of the first murders in the whole county for many, many years. It really changed everyone. Doors and cars that were once unlocked all day now had stronger locks and alarms. Rest in peace, Clarabelle. You were a wonderful woman, and I hope wherever you are that you don't remember anything from your last hours. Not commenting on the story because, dang, that's tragic, but I think Clarabelle is a great name. Story 4. Edmonton, Canada. There are a few that come to mind. I think it was about 3 years ago at the University of Alberta. A security company responsible for taking money from ATMs was restocking the machines when one of the guys that worked for them brutally executed his 3 coworkers with shots to the head and stole all of the money. He then tried to escape to the US border but was caught. One lady just got married, the 2 others were dads, I think. Really sad and unnecessary. Another one was this year. Some guy killed 7 people in a rampage, although I'm not sure the reason behind it. I know it was a family issue and not a random killing. Also this year, some guy on a native reserve brutally assaulted a little girl and left her to die in negative 30-degree weather. And a cop was shot to death by some crazy anti-government fanatic this year as well, which makes it the first cop killing in 25 years. We also had a tornado in 1987 that killed 27 people, and the roller coaster in West Edmonton Mall flew off the tracks in the 80s and killed several people as well. Edmonton is a pretty big city, so it shouldn't surprise me that there are this many incidents over all those years, but this is still so sad to hear altogether. So many lives lost and people hurt for completely senseless reasons. Take care, folks. Story 5. When I was in elementary school, I met one of my father's old friends. He owned this small wildlife refuge where he took care of local wildlife that were injured, and he nursed them back to health for release into the wild. Most notably, he had a small pride of mountain lions that refused to leave him. He had a small amount of government funding, but worked as my elementary school's janitor to fund his family instead of using the government's money. Government money went straight to the wildlife. One night, his wife had enough of having to live off 2 minimum wage jobs instead of a government fund and shot him. She threw him into the lion's cage and called the police, claiming the lions had attacked him. She thought they would tear him apart before the police could arrive, but they protected him as he lay dying, even from the police who showed up to save him. He died about 30 minutes before they could tranquilize the lions. He has a full foundation now dedicated to his memory and run by his mother. Story 6. You can list all kinds of things like brutal murder, serial killers, etc. One of the things that upsets me the most here was a minor story quickly forgotten. A young woman just stopped showing up for work one day and no one bothered to check up on her for a couple weeks. When they finally tried to track her down, they found out she died of a seizure in her apartment. She had a 2-year-old little boy who slowly died of hunger and thirst beside his mother's body because no one had bothered to investigate her disappearance until it was too late. This right here is pretty much my worst fear. The odds of me running into a serial killer or my kid being abducted and murdered are pretty darn low. Being a very quiet person who doesn't get out much, odds aren't great for my baby if something happens to me and my husband. Story 7. I live in New Haven, Connecticut. There was a pretty weird murder of a homeless dude this summer. They found his legs down by the train tracks, found his arms but no hands in a garbage bag nearby, and found his torso in an abandoned building. But I don't think they ever found the rest of him. We're also not far from Newton, so yeah. Oh, and Cheshire. There was a really fricked up home invasion incident there a few years ago too. 2 guys broke into a house, robbed the family, arred and killed the mother and 2 daughters, and beat the father to the verge of death. I grew up in Cheshire, came here looking for someone mentioning the Petite murders. My brother knew the younger dude in a sense. He met him just before the murders, the previous weekend or something. I remember him saying that he met a guy he had never seen before and thought he was creepy, and my old boss testified in court against them and everything. I feel so awful for that family, for what happened to the mother and 2 daughters. I hope those guys rot in jail, miserable for the rest of their lives. And for that father who apparently survived, I cannot begin to imagine how you move on with your life after that. I hope he's getting the support and care that he needs. Story 8. In a little racist redneck enclave in northernmost California, population 750, a teenage boy was almost beaten to death. His father was a local boy that married a Laotian woman while he was serving in Vietnam. They opened an amazing restaurant. It was always full, even in a tiny but hick town. That place still did great business, and had 2 kids. Fast forward to 1995-ish, and their son is now a high school student. Some girl dumps her boyfriend to start going out with a Laotian kid. The racist dads of town don't think that's cool at all. 4 grown butt men jumped that poor boy in the middle of Main Street. As they were beating him, they had to occasionally stop to direct traffic around the beating. Nobody stopped. Nobody helped. Nobody even called 911. When the beating was over, the men left the barely conscious boy in the street. He literally crawled a block and a half to get to a payphone so he could call for help. To all 4 of those people that beat that poor kid, and to every person who drove by without doing anything at all, how the hell do you live with yourselves? Even if you were too scared to try to get out and stop them, you get out and call the police down the road. You do something. All of you have guilt, but those 4 men especially. It is times like this that I wish hell was something I believed in. Story 9. There's two that stand out, both from my small hometown, about 5,000 people. About 10 years ago, a group of 4 students went out for lunch. The driver was speeding and got into a wreck. He survived. The other 3 girls in the car didn't. Students haven't been allowed to leave for lunch since, as far as I'm aware, graduated about 5 years ago. The second is creepier, but no people died. About 6 or 7 years ago, a satanic cult was busted. It was a group of about a dozen 7th to 10th graders trying to be Satanists. They had been murdering cats in a spot in the woods not far from the center of town. They'd hang them up and drain the blood into buckets to use in their rituals. That first story sounds like the beginning of a Footloose sequel, except with off-campus lunch instead of dances. Story 10. Escaped felon loosened around my hometown when I was 5 years old. Police came to our door and told us that we needed to leave the area as the fugitive was armed and considered extremely dangerous. 2 days later, the police found him. Rather than face capture, he shot himself. In my church, in my Sunday school room, on our nice leather couch. The scary part is that the church is seriously old, lots of creaking, groaning, house noises, and the hallway leading to that Sunday school room had room doors on either side all the way down and single-windowed exit to the old grove at the end, so it was already creepy as heck. After that guy shot himself, I could never walk down that hallway without the hairs on the back of my neck standing straight up. Ugh. Story 11. 9/11. No, I'm serious. I live in the New York metropolitan area, Rockland County, and a lot of people who lived in my town commuted to the city and worked in the World Trade Center. I personally knew several people who lost their lives in the towers and surrounding area, and the amount of people around town who also lost friends and loved ones that day was just horrific. I lived on Long Island and was in 8th grade when it happened. What I'll never forget, besides knowing several people who lost family members, was the thick black smoke flowing from the direction of the city. They wouldn't allow us outside for recess, and it was horrible to look at knowing what it was from. Story 12. I live in a nice middle-class suburb. A high school kid down the street from my house murdered his younger stepsister one night. I think she was 6 or 7. The reason he did this was that her father had been molesting her and the mother wasn't doing anything to put a stop to it, and somehow in his mind, this was a solution. I don't know what ended up happening to the boy. Jesus Christ, that poor kid. Not the correct way to deal with the situation, but he obviously wasn't all there up top. Not that anyone should be expected to deal with a monster like that. I hope he gets the help he deserves. Yeah, I am sure that kid probably had some pretty awful mental issues, and those parents are to blame in large part. But I'll never stop saying that sympathy doesn't erase accountability. I hope the kid gets help, but what he did? Jesus. Story 13. A few years back now, in the house on the nearest street corner to where I live, a guy was hanging out with some of his mates, probably getting drunk. Somehow something goes terribly wrong, read probably alcohol poisoning, and his friends, being drunk, failed to call for an ambulance. A few hours later, when they worked out he was dead, they freaked out and shoved his body in a bin and buried it in the backyard. Ended up getting tried for murder, but didn't end up convicted. Dude, almost the same thing happened in my town, except I think the kid overdosed on drugs and his friends dumped his body in the woods in a state park. Story 14. In my hometown, a 19-year-old guy with a knife entered kindergarten and murdered 3 kids and their teacher, wounded a nurse. After that, he left and was spotted and captured by a responding police car while calmly walking down the street, drenched in his victim's blood. It happened in 1998, I think. I wouldn't say I knew him, but I have seen him on a couple of occasions before it happened. Due to this being a really small town, you couldn't help noticing people. He was a weird, quiet dude, studied law for a half a year, but got booted for poor academic performance, if I remember correctly. He got life in prison. Story 15. My family home is next to a lake. Suitcases full of chopped up body parts have a tendency to wash up near the reeds. This has happened 3 separate times. Also, I can't confirm whether this is true, but someone found the corpse of an old lady in the lake, mostly intact except someone had mangled her genitalia area in a kinda weird way. The wounds looked like bite marks. Rumor was that our friendly neighborhood cannibal found new joy in eating pee. If it is any comfort, genitals and other soft body parts are the first things picked off by scavengers. You probably are cannibal-free. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.